So good morning everyone, and I hope that you can now hear me. I'm Stephanie from WorkSafe Tasmania and also the coordinator of WorkSafe Tasmania Month. Welcome to today's WorkSafe Month webinar, Building Positive Workplace Cultures Through Leader and Worker Engagement. I'll be moderating today's session, and before we do start, I'd appreciate if you can just take a few seconds to read the following slide about information that we will be delivering during WorkSafe Month seminars. I'd now like to go over a few items so that you know how to participate in today's webinar. So we've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks probably very similar like this on your computer screen in the upper right-hand corner. You're likely listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. You can, however, if you'd prefer to join over the phone, just select the telephone option in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You'll also have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing the questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We'll collect those questions and address them during the webinar, but also at the end. We are also recording today's webinar, so we will progressively be making those webinars available after WorkSafe Month on the WorkSafe Tasmania Month website. We will also be seeking your feedback and comments on today's presentation. So before you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate you completing that survey to provide us with your feedback and comments. I'd now like to hand you over to today's presenter, Oliver Femen from IPM Safety. You will note that the program does state that Michael from IPM Safety was meant to do today's presentation. Unfortunately, he's not able to be with us. So we have Oliver Femen instead to present today's webinar, Building Positive Workplace Cultures Through Leader and Worker Engagement. Hello, Oliver.
Good morning, Stephanie and attendees. Thank you for starting your week with us. So, as Stephanie said, my name is Oliver Femen. I'm a workplace health and safety consultant with IPM Safety. I've personally been involved in health and safety for about the past 10 years, most recently 3 years in Queensland in the oil and gas fields with an operating company up there. Prior to that, a bit of time in Papua New Guinea, North Africa, the southern states of Australia, and most important one being Tassie, where I have recently returned to raise my beautiful little boy in my home state. Right, and today we will be discussing positive safety culture through leader and worker engagement, which in my experience so far in the health and safety field is fundamental to successfully achieving our health and safety goals. So before we get into the 10 tips that I'll be sharing with you today around building safety culture, just a couple of points of clarity. The first one being that we'll be using the term safety culture, which in essence is the academic term for workplace, what we relate to as workplace health and safety culture. And this is the term we use within our program that we run with the team here at IPM Safety, which has been externally validated by Dr. Ben Brooks from the University of Tasmania. Now we will head into a polling question, I believe. Stephanie, you probably can help me with this one.
Yes, no, that's right. So we're now just launching a quick polling question. So a survey will come up. We do ask that you take a few moments to look at the questions. So the question is, if you were to roughly rate your workplace work health and safety culture, what would you give? So you should now see the poll open. So you've got 5 responses. The first one is unreliable, the second is low reliability, the third is mixed reliability, the fourth is high reliability, and the fifth is ultra reliability. So if you can take a few moments and rate roughly your workplace work health and safety culture.
And just by way of guidance for you in relation to that, guys, unreliable is essentially a shut-up culture where speaking up and addressing safety issues is not encouraged or rewarded. Low reliability goes into the space of we're aware of safety and we talk about it, however acting on it is not a strength, and action tends to come after incidents as opposed to prior. Mixed reliability, we're moving into the space of having systems and processes for all of our health and safety, all of the tasks and activities we conduct operationally. However, what's written in the documentation and the way we do things within the workplace are not always consistent. High reliability is moving into the space of being proactive. We evolve as a workplace in the health and safety space. We report, and it's a positive response in relation to that reporting. And then ultra reliable, safety has become what we do and how we do it.
All right, thank you for that, Oliver.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you, Oliver. We'll be closing that in a couple of seconds. So we'll now close the poll and share the results with you.
That's impressive. So a fairly good percentage of high reliability workplaces. Good spread. Now to add some context to the poll that we've just run there, in terms of our perspective in relation to this as an organisation. So what we have in here is what's called Hudson's Cultural Maturity Ladder. This is named after Pat Hudson, who was the researcher that developed this concept. He also created the Shell Hearts and Minds program. We've adjusted this slightly to fit with the perspective that we have at IPM Safety around cultural maturity within workplaces. In essence, what you'll see here is a tool, and it'll fill in soon, I promise, which gives you an understanding of where you may be presently in terms of maturity, where you may want to go as an organisation, and an understanding of the effort that it will take to get there in terms of planning that. So, as we saw with the poll in question, and the mouse is not liking me. Bottom of the ladder we have unreliable, pathological, so it's a shut up, put up with it, accidents happen culture. Reporting equals trouble. Obviously not a healthy space in terms of a culture that shares and addresses the issues that we may have. Low reliability, we're moving into safety is important, but they don't do what they're told. Action is after incidents, as we discussed already. 3, mixed reliability is bureaucratic. We have systems in place to manage all hazards and a lot of audits and a lot of paperwork. The effectiveness of this is variable. 4, high reliability. We've moved into the space of being proactive. Safety, leadership and values drive continuous improvement. Reporting results in action. So we're in a workspace where people are comfortable to share because they know that the responses to that sharing are in a positive manner. And then right at the top, we have ultra reliable or resilient, which is that workplace health and safety is integral to how we work and think. Positive, alert, highly reliable organisation and culture. That's what we're all aiming for in terms of culture within our workplaces. So, tip 1 in relation to developing a workplace health and safety culture is simplify it. And what that means in essence is we need to get past this. Obviously in that image we've got a sign for every step. If this is not effective workplace health and safety management, we're going overboard and the responses that we get from our workforce will not be beneficial. And the next image is an example of some paperwork that someone has brought into our workplace for, I believe it was an hour-and-a-half job. That was the paperwork they were required to read and sign prior to commencing the work. This is clearly taking things out of where they need to be in terms of getting action from your team. If our documentation is that intense, I'm speaking from experience, I haven't been in too many workplaces where the majority of the personnel in that workplace will be interested or willing to read that level of documentation and take it on in a serious manner. So we need to move away from that. We need our documentation to reflect our workplace and how we are managing risk. The next one here is an interesting label. Do not hold the wrong end of a chainsaw. Again, if we're relying on something like this to keep our workforce safe, we're not being effective. That's not simple. It's a dead end. So, step 2, once we have simple documentation that accurately reflects our practices in our workspace, we need to make it personal. An example of that is some of these posters here from WorkSafe. The reality for all of us in terms of workplace health and safety is that our biggest motivation for working safely is not in our workplace. We all have things that we enjoy doing outside of work, and that's where we need to be focused. Second slide here within this topic is a summary of 3 major studies, significant studies that have been done on the economic costs of incidents in the workplace. While there is some variation with the methodology in the third, essentially all 3 of these quite clearly from a statistical basis identify that the employer has the least cost on them financially in relation to workplace health and safety incidents. So not only is there the immediate costs of being involved in an incident, the financial costs sit very much in the space of the workers and the community. So again, this emphasises that we really must make health and safety personal if we are going to achieve our goals around a health and safety culture. So part of making it personal is having simple and clear goal. For us at IPM Safety, what we encourage people to look at as a goal is that working safe and well gets us home safe and well. And work is a reality. I imagine that some of you attending today are presently at work, and the vast majority of us have commitments that we must address in the workspace as part of living our lives. However, they're not the priority in our life for the vast majority of us. There are much bigger things at home. And of course, there's the famous radio station, YFM. What's in it for me? Part of making it personal is to address the question that comes into everyone's mind at times during their workspace and managing risk. Why wear the gear? Why bother about posture? Why go and grab the procedure and check it? If people understand the personal costs and have a clear goal on this, answering that question is much easier. Another aspect of this from a business perspective is knowing your people. What are their reasons to want to go home safe and to work safe? I've worked in some of the cultures I've worked with across the world. There's been some variation in this space. In one in particular, it was actually honourable to die or be injured at work. So that creates a challenge. However, the reality for all of those individuals was that at home they had families who needed to be fed and cared for. So knowing that that was their goal and not speaking so much from the space of you want to get home safe and well and more into the space of you want to look after your family is an example of knowing the people and ensuring that we support them in the goal that will get them home safe and well. Lose the generic OHS GUMF, be relevant to the work group's risk, work processes and goals. This again speaks to the space to some degree of keeping it simple. We need what we do as organisations to reflect the realities of what our organisation does in a practical sense. Our documentation needs to be accurate to our people's activities. We don't want OHS overkill. Make it safe to speak up is point number 3 within our 10 points, and this is obviously crucial within any cultural space. Make it safe to speak up is about enabling people to share with you the things that they will identify in their day-to-day activities around managing risk. Where people are comfortable to share with their leadership and their team as a whole, we get positive results. And there has been some research into this space. Barton and Sutcliffe conducted some research that was very much focused on bushfires and where bushfires escaped from containment lines, how that occurred, what led up to that. And one of the consistent findings within that space is that the information was known within the team. However, it did not necessarily get to the correct person in terms of addressing it and creating the right response. This is very much the case for us in our workplaces also around managing risk. If the people who have control and management of the risk are informed, we can address things. To do that, we need to be able to speak up. So we need multiple reporting options. People need a number of ways that they can identify and address things, communicate them to their team. And we need to respond positively to those reports. In the past few years, I've worked in a number of remote locations, and in some cases, the reporting process was fantastic. Response from a field was really positive, and you saw the difference in that space, where at other times, people were scared to report because they were concerned about the sort of outcomes that would get. And that's difficult in a lot of work environments. Business as a whole, the management team can the work that you're conducting, your team's conducting is sort of like your kids to some degree. So when someone informs you something about it, concern is immediate, and that's understandable. However, what we need to do in that process is ensure that we respond to it in a manner that's appropriate, but also encourages that reporting to continue. Pat on the back. Again, it's in the space of rewarding people for that speaking up, encourages others to do so as well. And defend the right to speak up. Again, if we support each other in this process and we make it clear that speaking up is not only accepted but encouraged, and any negativity towards that is cleared up as not being effective to getting our team home safe and well, that will have significant impact on building that positive culture. Fourth point, measurement and benchmarking. So in this space around culture, what we have at IPM Safety is a tool with 35 questions for measuring cultural reliability. We call it a cultural reliability survey, surprisingly. This scores you out of 100 relating to the responses for those questions. And here we have an example question and the sort of response that we would anticipate getting from an organisation that's culture is strong or moving into the proactive space. Raising reporting levels. So the second aspect, once we've monitored and benchmarked where our culture is at, one of the things that help us build and strengthen this culture is to raise the reporting levels, which to some degree is involved in that speaking up, but it's moving it into the space of not just speaking up, but using the systems that we have to do that speaking up. Reporting hazards, identifying where things happen, reporting incidents too, and here we have an example on the slides of the pie chart there that demonstrates some statistics where we're seeing roughly a 3-to-1 incidents to hazards ratio. That's, well, 2-to-1, sorry, 2 incidents to every 1 hazard. What we see as a healthy space in regards to this sort of reporting is around 5-to-1. So we're looking at 5 hazards being reported to every 1 incident. The reality is that hazards, where we can identify them in the workspace, are a gimme. They're an opportunity to identify and address risk not being well managed prior to it becoming an incident. So clearly the example there is there's space to improve. That's not how we want our statistics looking. And here again is another example from a client of ours of some reporting and identifying where we're at with in regards to the incident rate within the workplace. And another value that we see in the reporting process is that where we are reporting clearly and consistently, we can identify when we're having failures or when our system is requiring immediate attention. As you can see there was an initial peak which has been addressed. Things have started to move down into a safer area, and then at the April-May area we've headed up again, which is clearly not the direction that we want to see it moving, but it helps us identify it and manage it. The fact that we're getting these reported means that we can have action to address the issues. Step 6 is closing the loop. Fantastic. We've got people reporting, we've got them speaking up, they're moving into the space of building a culture that will manage risk well. However, if it isn't positively received, fully heard, thought about, and effective action taking, then we're not closing the loop. We need to get into that space of ensuring that what is identified is addressed. And that's a nice diagram to help explain that process to some degree. So, in closing the loop, we need to stop it if it's unsafe. We need to empower the stop the work aspect of our team's management of risk in the workplace. Where it's unsafe, we need to step up and say, hey, this is unsafe and it stops today. And then we address it. Fix unsafe conditions as soon as possible. Again, action in response to what is raised is closing the loop. If we don't act, we won't see positive culture because we're not seeing people supported in raising what needs to be raised. And here we have an example of the need to close the loop. This is the loop, sorry. This is young Bradley Alford, who was 21 years old. He'd had his truck driver's license for a couple of weeks. He's out with his team on the rig and they're relocating to a new lease. They arrive at the lease, there's a very steep hill, and they look at it and go, oh, Bradley, have a go at this, mate, see how you go. And unfortunately, the truck was old, the brakes were faulty, there was no seatbelt, it lost control and rolled over, and young Bradley died. Now, while the company was convicted of a reckless act, there's a number of examples in this space, the loop not getting closed, which may have led to that in terms of the poor maintenance of the equipment, the limited experience of the individual and giving them the instruction to conduct that task. But the reality of not closing that loop is not the conviction, it's the changed dynamic of that family, which is a permanent thing, and the lost opportunities of this young man. So that's an example of the importance of ensuring we do close that loop. Visible leadership, and this is vital to an effective cultural change within your workplace or maintaining that culture within your workplace. The more we have leaders attending and participating in the workplace, the more people believe that safety is a part and an important priority of your business as an operation. One of the things we do within our safety culture program is conduct what we call site interactions, where we go out with the leaders and look at what your team is doing operationally, give them some feedback. Doesn't necessarily have to all be negative. That, in fact, that would be concerning. The reality is we can see those positive things and give people a pat on the back at the day where it's happening, that it helps them see the value in doing that from the business as well as personally. To do that, leaders must lead, i.e. walk the talk. Get out daily or at least weekly. Avoid assuming, as it leads to in the dot point there. There's a lot of danger in assumption. Seeing things visually gives us confirmation of where we're really at in terms of managing risk in our workplace. Gather and engage, ask, listen, learn, and improve. There is so much benefit in getting the opinions and values of the people that you have your workplace shared with, the others that will help you build this culture. So encouraging them to engage actively with you as a leader is a really important aspect of building a strong culture within your workplace.
I might just sort of come in at that point, Oliver. Do you sort of find? I know obviously that you sort of mentioned visible leadership and leaders must lead. Do you sometimes find it might be the case that it's usually the bottom driving the top as opposed to the top driving the bottom?
Yeah, sorry, we actually had a little chat about this earlier. It's quite variable in that space in terms of you will find workplaces, quite often smaller workplaces, where the link between the management team and the workforce is closer by the nature of the organisation size and structure. And often in those environments, it's driven by the team as a whole. In the larger ones, it's really variable. We see workplaces where the management are really keen to get things happening from a safety perspective, and they're driving it to the best of their ability, and finding roadblocks, or in some cases no roadblocks, and moving into a really positive space. And we also see a lot of workplaces where, yeah, absolutely that, especially in my experiences in remote sites, doing the FIFO work, in particular overseas. Once you become a long distance from an office, it's very difficult for the people within that office to constantly be aware of and interested in what's happening on the other side of the globe, essentially. And often that space between teams can lead to the team in the field being very focused on goals, but not necessarily being the same goals shared in the office environment. Did that answer the question, Stephanie? Sorry.
Yes. So I guess in instances like that, what I guess for someone on the bottom level wanting to, I guess, get more engagement from their leader within the organisation, what can they do to I guess encourage them to engage in a greater way with their workers?
So one of the things that I would strongly encourage is become familiar with the systems and processes that you presently have in your organisation from a safety management perspective, and where there's none, obviously raise that as the concern. But where there are systems, using that system, raise the challenges that you're identifying. Ensure that it's getting reported in the appropriate manner.
Mm-hmm.
and bring it to the attention of your management team. Now, there will be times where perhaps the risk is such that you need to actually just stop the job and go, hang on guys, this isn't consistent with getting all of us home safe and well today, and we need to stop right now and have a serious talk about this.
And if it's the case that leaders don't want to lead, what do you do in that situation?
So that, in part, is where we deliver value for organisations in the site interaction aspect of things. More often than not, in my experience, leaders who aren't particularly keen to lead have become that way because they've been promoted into the leadership space through being good at the job they were in previously. And that's fantastic. It's really important to acknowledge and reward people for having talent in a space. However, being promoted because of that doesn't necessarily deliver to you strong leadership skills. And quite often it's not necessarily that people don't want to lead so much as they haven't been taught how, or they haven't been given good guidance and instruction on how to lead within that space. And coaching is a big part of that. As an organisation, assisting people in delivering some training and value, where you're not in a position to be able to make the decision that your organisation will do that, frank conversation can add value in that space in an assertive, polite manner, obviously. Very important to address anyone in your workspace respectfully. However, it's also important to raise concern where you identify it in that space.
And would that, I guess, also assist in a situation where, I guess, you might sort of phrase something, or I guess phrase management as having industrial blindness? In other words, they sort of probably ignore or miss things or override the way things should be done.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've encouraged in this space in the past in that regard is get any management that are through the nature of their role or whatever it might be, not entirely aware of the risks that the team are facing in the workspace. Get them out into that workspace, actually seeing it. That active participation in the workspace and actually getting out there and seeing things often makes it much more real, and will often help in addressing the industrial blindness factor.
Okay.
There we go. Fair and firm feedback and consequences. So another aspect of all of this is, as an organisation, we need to be consistent with what our standards are, what we accept, don't accept, and how we respond to those. And that needs to be delivered in a fair and firm manner, consistently across the organisation. And that's often one of the challenges in the cultural space, but really needs to be valued and addressed.
And would, I guess, obviously it works both ways. So if management is firm on wanting to, I guess, make change in the safety space, and the workers don't want to cooperate, then obviously there needs to be changes within engagement there.
Yeah, absolutely. Generally speaking, the only time we see situations like that is where we've had poor engagement, poor consultation within the process. It's not often you'll find a workplace where people don't want to look after themselves. However, it is quite often that you'll find people respond negatively to change within the workplace. Change can be quite scary, and often where we bring change in without involving people in it and giving them some form of ownership in that change process, they will be uncomfortable. And part of addressing that is definitely, as you said, Stephanie, it's about ensuring that we communicate and engage appropriately in that space. And that's necessary too. If we're going to effectively manage risk, the people who are actually out there facing that risk, they have the greatest amount of value to add in terms of how we effectively manage that risk. Visible change. So again, and this speaks partly to what we've been discussing a little bit there in terms of change is a part of managing workplaces. We will have changes, and particularly where we're encouraging people to report and identify hazards within their workspace, ensuring that the changes that occur in response to those identified concerns or hazards are visible has immeasurable value. People see that what they have trusted you with in terms of information, they've been willing to share and try and address in the workspace. If they can see action in response to that, the involvement you will get from them as a whole in relation to building your team into a safe one is far more substantial than any situation where the change may occur but it's not communicated. We often see that in workplaces where management are responding to hazards and people are reporting them. However, the process of discussing that and ensuring that it's communicated what has happened in terms of a response is inconsistent, and that's very damaging in the culture space. People feel like they're not heard or not taken seriously, and it's very hard to make serious action where you don't feel that you're being heard in a serious manner. So those changes can be physically changing the environment, and we'll see an example of that on the next slide. Point out, communicate improvements, and thank workers who raise the issue or participate in solving it. So pat on the back, especially one where it's a bit of public acknowledgement within the team of, hey, this person has identified and assisted us all in being safer, has a immeasurable value to getting people home safe and well and building that culture. And here's an example of visible change. So this is from one of our clients. They had, prior to this, an arrangement in their workplace that made it challenging to identify where you would get the procedures, where you might find policies and processes, PPE, and what a PPE would be appropriate. And they've obviously had a real crack here. They've adjusted this workspace to make everything very accessible, very visible, and fantastic effort in terms of identifying, hey, we were failing here, and this is what we're doing to make it better. People can see that, they can participate in it, get to buy-in, that's a win. Point 9 within our 10 tips is interrupt the unsafe and the unhealthy, and this is obviously crucial. If we're talking about having a workplace health and safety culture that is proactive and assists people to be safe, first step in that space is being willing to interrupt not only ourselves but each other, and being accepting of interruption. Within our program, we just refer to these moments as red flag moments. Moments where things happen in our head like, I should, I'm supposed to, I know I shouldn't, but it's just a quick job, I'll be right, it's fine. He, she, they shouldn't be. When we're having thoughts like this, what's generally happening in our mind is we're getting to a point where we have the opportunity to either interrupt ourselves or a teammate in a manner that will help us manage risk effectively, or justify something that will be riding our luck. The other things we need to be aware of in the flagging space are being frustrated, being annoyed, rushing, fatigued, complacent, automatic, distracted. I look at that and I think, I've experienced all of those in the car on a number of occasions throughout my life, and it's definitely the situation where we need to stop and go, hang on, why? Why am I feeling this? Is there value in the disturbance within my thoughts right now? Need to stop, think about what we're about to do, how we're going to manage that risk moving forwards, make choices in relation to that, and then act. And we want to be comfortable that everyone in our workspace is doing that. Where we get to that resilient workspace, we can put our hands on our heart and we can say, when I'm not team members, I know, even when no one is around, that they will stop, think, choose in a manner that's consistent with getting themselves home safe and well, and then act appropriately. And the final point within these 10 is to manage risk well now. And that's in terms of some visual examples. Photos will come up momentarily, I'm hoping. Identifying things like this in our workplace and going, you know, right now, that does not manage the risk. It's not appropriate to stand on that and trust it. Another good example here is another one that we've had from an office space that we were in recently. This is a great example of where we can identify that risk is not being managed well. Anyone who sees that should be fairly comfortable that that's not acceptable. That's not managing risk well. We've got stuff poking in conduit out of a hole in the wall. We've got a massive bundle of leads. It's not looking good. We've got an office where this existed that a number of people have walked past it, plugged things in and out of that, and even a contractor who's come through and done testing and tagging of all of those electrical cables tied up within that, and then walked away. And that's because managing risk well now didn't occur. We didn't look at it and say, this is an unacceptable standard and we need to address it. It's that moment-to-moment aspect. Every moment we need to be going, is the risk managed well now, and how are we responding? Build a positive culture. So this is the summary, of our 10 tips. Simplify health and safety. Point number 1, we need it simple. The reality is that our workplace health and safety management systems, processes, they're for everyone in our workplace. They need to be in a language and format that is for everyone within our workplace. Make it personal. At the end of the day, all of us have personal motivations and reasons for getting home safe and well, and they need to be the focus point for why we're doing this, why we're participating in the culture and doing what we can to keep our team safe. Make it safe to speak up. As we talked about, the more we communicate, the better we respond to risk. Measure and benchmark. So again, we need to know where we're at in terms of our culture so that we can identify how we're going to address that or maintain that. In this case, it takes effort. We get to the top of that ladder that you saw earlier, and we're a resilient culture. That doesn't happen without effort, and it won't maintain without effort. So measuring and benchmarking, that is an important part. And raising the reporting levels, ensuring that we're communicating consistently and using the systems we have available to do so. Close the loop, sitting in that space again of the response. So people are trusting us with information and giving us an opportunity to act. That action needs to occur. Visible leadership, again, being present in the workspace, participating with our team in that culture. And visible change. Again, everyone's been in the situation of seeing nothing happen from a report and seeing something happen from a report. And we all know the difference in how that feels. Interrupt the unsafe and the unhealthy. Any positive safety culture is in the space of being willing to and actively doing interruptions for each other and accepting them as a team when they occur. And obviously managing that risk well now. We get all the things above right, we're in a very strong place for doing that final point.
Thank you.
Stephanie.
Thank you, Oliver. So if there are any other questions that people would like to submit for the webinar that we've just done, please do so now. But I'll just again finally just let you know that today's webinar has been recorded, and we will progressively be getting those webinars up onto the WorkSafe Tasmania website. We will also be seeking your feedback from today's session, so we do ask that you do sort of hang on the line, so hang on to your computer for a few seconds while that feedback does come up. But I can't see that any other questions have come through. So Oliver, I do thank you for taking the time to be part of today's WorkSafe Month webinar, Building Workplace Cultures Through Leader and Worker Engagement. And thank you also to everyone for attending today's webinar. And as I said, if you just wait a few moments once we do close today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we'd appreciate you taking some time to complete that feedback. So on behalf of WorkSafe Month and our presenter today, thank you everyone for joining us, and have a rest of the great day. Thank you.